I met Vladimir about 12 years ago at the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa. We had both been invited to testify about the Magnitsky Act, a piece of legislation to freeze the assets and ban the visas of Russian human rights violators. I hadn't met Vladimir before, and when he showed up, he spoke perfect English, perfect French, of course, perfect Russian. And he was the most charismatic and articulate public speaker I'd ever heard. He was like a young Nelson Mandela or Václav Havel. And he was so persuasive, both to me and to the parliamentarians, that from that moment on, we became allies in this fight for the Magnitsky Act and fight for justice for Russian victims. So Vladimir Kara-Murza has been sentenced to 25 years, which is the longest sentence of any political prisoner in Russia. The reason for that is his work on the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act is something that Putin hates more than anything in the world. And Vladimir found the Achilles heel of Vladimir Putin. He pushed on that Achilles heel, and as a result, he ended up with this shocking, long, politically motivated sentence, which is horrible for Vladimir. I don't think he's going to survive 25 years, let alone 5 years. But it's also a very strong indication of how important Vladimir's work has been and how he really found what mattered to the Putin regime. Putin is a guy who values money more than human life. The Magnitsky Act puts his money at risk, and he was ready to kill anybody who stood in the way between him and his money. And in spite of that, Vladimir courageously traveled around the world and testified at multiple parliaments to get the Magnitsky Act passed. It's been passed now in 35 countries. Putin has pursued everybody involved. Putin killed Boris Nemtsov, who was one of the other advocates. He poisoned Vladimir twice in the summer of 2015 and 2017. And in spite of all of that, Vladimir has continued to fight on, to stand up to the Putin regime, to call for justice for the Russian people. I begged Vladimir every time he wanted to go to Russia, don't go back. It's too dangerous. They've tried to kill you twice. And as the war started, he said, I have to go back. I'm asking the Russian people to stand up to Putin to protest this murderous war. I can't ask the people to do that if I'm too afraid to go back to my own country. And I begged and pleaded and cajoled and did everything I could to try to stop him from going back. And he was absolutely resolute. For him, there was not even a question that he was going to go back to his home country and stand up to Putin. So Russia has been taking many, many hostages. There's two types of hostages. There are random hostages, people like Evan Gershkovich, another American named Paul Whelan, who are just chips, bargaining chips. No specific reason to take them other than they need some American hostages. And then there are political prisoners, people like Vladimir Kara-Murza, Alexei Navalny, Ilya Yashin. And these are people that Putin wanted to take out of the political frame to prevent their voices from being heard, etc. And among these people, Vladimir he's got the absolute most sympathetic record of basically any political prisoner out there. In order to prevent Vladimir from dying in prison, the first thing we needed to do was to make sure the Russians understood that he was a valuable hostage. And to do that, we got a number of countries to sanction, using the Magnitsky Act, the people who have persecuted him. Since last year, Canada, the United States, the UK, and the European Union have all sanctioned the people involved in his persecution. So we've made the point that he's a valuable hostage. But at this stage, he's not going to survive a long sentence because of the after effects of the previous poison assassination attempts. And so we need to get him out. And at this point, we need to get governments to look for a swap, to look for Russian spies or propagandists who are in prison in the West to swap him for. And we need the British government in particular. Vladimir has a British passport, to step up. And so far, the British government has been very passive in this case. So the British government doesn't have a long or a favorable history when it comes to hostages. There's another hostage, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Her husband had to get a tent set up in front of the Foreign Office and go on a hunger strike before they actually got active in seeking her release. I don't think that Vladimir's wife Yevgenia should be doing any hunger strikes in front of the Foreign Office. I think the government should be proactively fighting for his release. The British government should set up an office, Office of Hostage Affairs, like the US has done. And that office should be staffed by high-level people whose only job it is to use whatever resources the British government has, both positive, negative, and all other resources against Russia to secure the release of Vladimir Kara-Murza. British people or others around the world can write to their politicians and demand that the politicians push the government to fight for Vladimir Kara-Murza, for his release. This squeaky wheel gets the grease. Those people who shriek the loudest get results. And the government needs to understand that this is not something they can sweep under the carpet. Vladimir Kara-Murza is a British citizen. He's been wrongfully detained. He's been given the longest prison sentence of any political prisoner in Russia. He is the face of a Russia that we want, and we should fight for him in every way possible. I spoke to Vladimir about a week before he went back to Russia. I begged him not to go. I said to Vladimir, please don't. I don't want to spend the next 10 years of my life having to fight to get you out of prison. I'm now 1 year into that 10-year. I'm hoping it's going to be a lot less than 10 years. My message to Vladimir is that we're coming to get you.